Hi everyone, thank you for coming in and welcome to yet another Trisotech sponsored webinar. Here's Jonathan from Trisotech, and once again I will be your host for today's session, Building Business Applications with Visual Modeling. Today we have an experienced practitioner and decision modeling expert as our featured panelist, Nick Broom from Blue Powder Consultancy. But before diving into the heart of the matter, let's have a look at the agenda. So as usual, we have 60 minutes together today. I will start by introducing our panelists. I will then say a few words about Trisotech before introducing our session. Following this, Nick's demonstration should last around 30 minutes, so we will have some time at the end for answering your questions. Speaking of which, please don't hesitate to submit questions using the GoToWebinar control panel at any time. And one last thing, this webinar is recorded. You will get access to the replay later today when we finish uploading it to our website. We will send you a link by email. So our expert today is Nick Broom from Blue Powder Consultancy, a UK-based firm that provides guidance and expertise in the field of decision modeling. He has been a business analyst for over 15 years and specializes in agile software delivery projects. He has delivered decision modeling projects for enterprise-level companies whilst providing coaching to in-house staff. A highly experienced and skilled business analyst, Nick has a proven track record in major financial and legal institutions, healthcare, regulations, logistics, and contact center environments. He has also written multiple articles about decision modeling and has been an active member of the decision management community. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with Trisotech, we are an award-winning software solution provider. With the Digital Enterprise Suite, visual modeling and automation capabilities, organizations are in a unique position to transform their business, not only to be more efficient and effective, but also more agile and innovating and improving customer experience. So at the bottom of this slide, you can see all the tiles that represent our suites component. So you can see it's a broad toolset. We support a lot of different digital transformation projects. Here's a list of some of the many use cases our clients are using our toolset for. So the one we will focus on today is the creation of business applications using visual business modeling. We will go over an example that is simple, yet providing us an overview of how accessible this approach is to business users. So how does that work? Well, Trisotech's toolset is targeted at the business users. So from the strategy to the operations, it provides insights and guidance for a successful transformation. Once the operational models are created within the Digital Enterprise Suite, they can be published and automated. Being standard-based, the models can be executed in any engine that supports BPMN, DMN, and/or CMMN. In our particular case, our panelists use Microsoft Flow to invoke a decision model that was created using our DMN Modeler. And to create an intuitive interface, he used Microsoft Power Apps. So let's give you a little bit of context around the example we will present today. It was a submission to a decision management community challenge done by Nick in last April. The DM community released the instructions to a challenge that was pretty open. So the challenge was to use a predefined set of business rules and to implement them into a decision modeling tool. It was that simple, but Nick decided to go further and created a functional application based on the constraints from the challenge. So now it's time for him to show you the results and to go over how he managed to create this application in less than an hour. I will be back at the end of the demo to handle the questions, so please don't hesitate to post some. So Nick, I will now make you the presenter.
Okay, thanks for that, Jonathan. Hello to everybody. Thanks for Jonathan for that introduction. As you said, my name's Nick Broom, independent consultant, business analyst for a number of years. I've been doing decision modeling since about 2010. And I've been working with DMN standard pretty much since its initial draft publication. So quite excited today to show you how that fits into a more integrated environment. So what I'm aiming to do today is show a simple example, and I will emphasize the fact that it is very simple as far as the logic goes. But what I'm aiming to show is how the Trisotech DMN Modeler and its cloud execution capabilities can be integrated with commonly available tools. So Jonathan's mentioned I've used Microsoft Power Apps and Microsoft Flow. So majority of organizations, I'm not saying all, will have a Microsoft Office, typically Business Enterprise Edition. That does typically come with Power Apps and Microsoft Flow. So that's why I say it's a commonly used set of applications aimed at what I would describe as technical business users. So I class business analysts really as technical business users, but you could probably say anybody that's got a decent grasp of Excel might be classed as a technical business user. So that's how I'm pitching this. I've actually got a couple examples to go through. The first is the one that Jonathan mentioned about the decision modeling community challenge. The second one has just got a bit more meat to the bones, and I will go into that quickly after I've shown the first one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through the application first. I'm then going to show the logic that it invokes, and I'm going to show how Microsoft Flow actually makes that invocation and explain a bit more detail around that. So, as I said right at the start, this is a very simple example. I'm also not saying that this is the only way that you could do this. There are a number of different options, but because it was a decision modeling community challenge, I've done it in this particular way. And hopefully, as we go through this, it'll spark a bit of inspiration for people going, oh, actually, I could see how I might be able to do that in my particular organization. So, dead simple UI. The purpose of the challenge was to say, how much should I charge a customer of a city's recreational facilities? So the first question that I'm going to ask is whether the customer's a senior citizen or not. If they are, that's the bit that basically says you don't ever charge them anything. So I'm going to say, yes, they're a senior citizen. The calculate fee button becomes enabled. I'm going to click on calculate fee. It will think about it, and it tells me that actually it doesn't cost anything for that senior citizen. So that's why I say you can see this is why it's a simple example. Start that again. The slightly more complex is if they're not a senior citizen. So I say no. That pops me up a set of additional details. So there's a whole set of limitations around this particular use case. I've made assumptions that it's somebody walking in off the street to somebody that's got a system in front of them, so it's not advanced bookings or anything like that. There are a number of business rules that I would probably want to investigate a little bit further if this was a real world example. So I've made a whole set of assumptions, so you just have to bear with any limitations that you observe with this. So usage details, when are they using it? So let's say I'm using it on a Wednesday and I'm only going to be there for half an hour. So again, calculate fee button has become available. I click on that. That action of me clicking on that is invoking the decision logic that I'll show you in a minute. So you can see with this, it's actually pretty quick. And this has told me, right, the fee required is $2. So it's obviously slightly more. Let's start again, do something a little bit more complicated. So weekend peak, so I'm in there on a Saturday, peak time, maybe let's say it's around about 10 o'clock, and I'm going to be there for 1 to 2 hours because I've got a lot to do. Calculate the fee. You can see it's gone up to $10 this time. Let's go, actually, no, do you know what? I'm going to be here for 2 hours as well because I'm going to use the sauna. Click on that, calculate the fee. That goes up to 15. So you can see that basically what I've tried to do here is build up a user interface that's only asking the user for the information that's actually required. So there's no point presenting all of these usage details questions if they've already said that they're a senior citizen. So that's the basic application. There's nothing more to it than that. There's a couple of little bits that I think are quite nice here, such as making sure that you only pass information into the decision if it's been populated. So that's why I've deliberately made things like calculate fee disabled until I know I've got enough information to actually invoke the decision in the first place. Because what I didn't want to do with this is say, just allow calculate fee to be available at all times and actually just push nonsense into the decision, and therefore you start getting null pointer exceptions, or you have to specify a whole load of error trapping conditions. Build that kind of stuff into the UI. Is my general principle for that. So that's why if I've said no, I need to have answered these questions before calculate fee will become available. If, however, I've said yes, then it is available because that's the only piece of information I need in this particular instance. So I'll do weekday less than an hour calculate fee. Embed that in your brain, that's $2. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you the logic. So this is in the Trisotech DMN Modeler. So customer usage details, if I have a look at that, what this is expecting is a set of data that looks very similar to what I called it in Power Apps. So are they a senior citizen, yes or no? When are they using it? How long are they using it for? And the decision logic itself, as I say, is pretty trivial. So what this is showing me is that it's a pretty straightforward decision table. So we saw when I first clicked on it, if it's a senior citizen, then the facility fee they're requiring is 0. So it doesn't care about the usage time, doesn't care about the usage duration. If in the instance that it's not a senior citizen, then that's when we care whether it's a weekday and whether it's 1 or 2 hours or whether it's less than that. You remember the example that I left on screen here was a fee required of $2. So when are they using it weekday? They're using it for less than an hour. You can see that that's actually fired that row there to give us the result of 2. So that's the modeler logic. That's dead simple. What I've then done is I've then exported that. I've published that to the cloud, which in the DMN modeler is a case of going into execution, doing cloud publish, and then that will put it in a service library. So if I look in the service library, so this is where all of my published decisions go. I've got this thing called rec fee. So that is, you can see in that teeny tiny little picture there that is my decision logic, but it is now an executable file, and I can access that from Microsoft Flow. So Microsoft Flow is the thing that's actually doing the invocation of this decision in the first place. So what's happening is when I click on calculate fee, that is triggering this particular flow. The only step in this flow is actually an invocation of the decision, which is this execute rec fee. And what it's doing is it's passing some parameters that's been passed from Power Apps into the DMN modeling execution. And then it's responding back into Power Apps. So that's literally all there is to it, but the clever bit really is in here. So I've created, in Power Apps and in Microsoft Flow, you've got this concept of connectors. So the whole idea with Microsoft Flow is that you can connect to things like SharePoint, to Excel, to access to a whole number of things, but you can also do this thing called a custom connection. And the custom connection is what I've done. And the way the Trisotech tool makes this dead easy for you is that you create a custom connector and you can update it from an open API file, which is what I've done. So if I wanted to actually create a custom connector, you've got a whole set of options down here. If I use the open API button, that will create me a JSON file, and that JSON file acts as the basis of the custom connector that I can then put into Power Apps. So I'll give you a quick example of how that works. If I click on this step and add an action, if I click on my custom connectors, it'll actually show that I've got a whole load of custom connectors corresponding to all the decision models that I've done, and rec fee is the one that I've used in this particular instance. I'll add it again just so that you can see what kind of thing it asks me for. So what it knows is it knows that I'm expecting a set of input data, and that set of input data, you can see from the names, corresponds to the input data that we saw input data item here. So if I go back into this one, I didn't mean to do that. If I go back into this one and actually reassign the input data type, so the input data type is that one. What I've got is senior citizen, usage time, usage duration, which actually mirrors exactly to the options there. So all I have to do then is say, right, well, which things that are coming from Power Apps are the things that actually need to be passed into the decision. So I'll just delete that. And that is, I say that's all there is to it. There's obviously quite a bit of stuff that you'd have to get to grips with. But I am confident that, again, you don't need to be a developer to do this, because I'm not a developer at the end of the day. It requires a little bit of learning, but there's plenty of guidance that can tell you how to do that. But as Jonathan said, this took me about an hour to do this whole thing end to end. So that is building the application from scratch, building the logic, which granted, I showed you the logic. It's not very difficult. Build the flow, do some tests, and basically, I think it took me longer to do the original YouTube video actually showing it than it did to build the application in the first place. So just to recap all of that, if I go back to the application, what we're seeing is I'm entering a set of input data values. I'm then clicking on a button which is invoking the decision via Microsoft Flow. Microsoft Flow is taking the outcomes of that decision and it's returning it back to Power Apps. Power Apps is then displaying that in the application itself. And I've built in a series of functions within the app to allow me to do things like start again, like you've just seen, clears out all of the data, recalculates, goes back in and gives me a different result. So that's the decision modeling challenge example. What I'm going to do now is just go into the other example I talked about. And the reason I wanted to look at that one is because there's slight more complexity to the actual logic, but what you can see is you've still got a pretty simplistic application as well. So that's really where the beauty of decision modeling as a whole comes as well, because what you've got here is a user entering something straightforward into a UI, but all of the legwork is being done by the decision model, because even the process model, so if you think about Microsoft Flow in the same way that you think about any process model, the process is very, very simple. That becomes clearer with the next example that I'm going to show you. So,
Nick, before going to this example, would you mind going back to the DMN Modeler and explain a little bit more, because we have two questions from the audience on the same topic. So before you jump to the other example,
yeah, sure.
If you could explain right here the data type, what's the data type and how you got to these configurations per se.
So the data types of each of the individual data input items, do you mean? So these bits here?
Exactly.
Okay, so for me, this is where experience of data modeling comes to the fore. Really, this is just about understanding the kind of questions that you're going to be asking. What is it that you need to know about your data? So when I was looking at the analysis for this particular challenge, what I was saying is, right, well, so if one of my overriding conditions is I need to know whether this person's a senior citizen or not, I'm going to treat that as a yes or no. Now, that could actually get a lot more complicated, but because, like I said a little bit earlier, you know, the challenge didn't allow for me to do more analysis on it. Things like determining whether somebody's a senior citizen could actually be a lot more complicated. So, for example, it might be that you need to have a date of birth or have proof of your age or have some form of senior citizen card. Anything like that could actually make determining a senior citizen a decision in its own right. But as I didn't have any of that information, I made the assumption that it was somebody sat behind a desk, probably looking at a proof of identification, and therefore saying, yes, they are a senior citizen, or no, they're not. So that's why I set that as a Boolean. The usage time and the duration. The The duration is probably the more interesting thing there, because a duration you would expect maybe to enter as a number, but I've decided to do it as an enumeration instead, for exactly the same reasons as I made senior citizen a Boolean, because what I said is, well, if the conditions without further analysis just amount to these things, I'm just going to make that a choice of ranges that can be input by the user. So when it comes to determining a data type, it's all about the analysis that you do into the information that you're handling to understand whether it's more appropriate to say, I know what these list of values are going to be, and therefore I'm going to specify them. Or it could be that you say, actually, the number of possible options, so it is an enumeration, but the number of options are so vast, and actually they're stored in a different system, that I'm not going to document them here. I'm going to have that as a, let's say, a piece of input data in its own right. So to cut a very long story short, ultimately coming up with the data types is just part of the analysis that I do into the data at the time when I'm trying to understand the problem domain. Now, just to expand on that a little bit, when it comes to actually adding that data into Trisotech, if people want to know how that works, if I just add something new in for the time being, so let's say I care about the month for whatever reason, the data types are either simple, so I can pick that it's text, in which case the ones above are a text, or a Boolean like I've already done, or a number, etc. Existing type is if you've defined your own data types, and a structure is if your data type is actually a bit more complex. I won't go into that right now without an example to illustrate it, but that's how the tool actually supports the addition of data types as well. Jonathan, does that answer the question?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Nick, and for Chuck and Mike who asked the question. I hope that this clarified, and if not, just set another question, and we'll try to respond to you by email afterwards. Thank you, Nick.
Were there any other questions on that one before I move on to the next example?
Not for now. You can move on to the next one.
Okay, cool. Okay, so this next one is an Sku generator. So this is actually a tool that I built for my wife's business, and particularly because she runs a lot of her business from her phone. She basically runs a dog harness business, or dog tailoring, to give it a more grandiose term. And basically, as a result of that, she's got a product inventory that she needs to manage, and she's constantly coming up with new products. So anybody that's worked in a product space before will probably be familiar with the concept of an SKU, but it's essentially a unique identifier for that product that allows you to track inventory. So what I basically said was, well, I can build you something where you can just put in a few pieces of detail, and then when you've come up with your new design, you can just run this app from your phone, and you'll be able to create the product separately. So this is not an all singing, all dancing tool. This is literally just generating the SKU, and then you can add it to your products. So I'll just show you very quickly how this one works. So if she's come up with a new harness that's in neon, if I could spell neon pink, it is a harness. It's going to be made of scuba. I want to generate an SKU for that. It's going to think about that for a bit. Right, so it's come up with a unique identifier for that, Neo Har Sku. I'm going to come up with another one actually, and rather than being neon pink, I'm also going to come up with neon yellow. Again, harness in scuba, generate an SKU. So that's actually worked out well for that combination of stuff. It looks like you've already got one of those. So it's then come up with a unique identifier to distinguish it from the previous one. So again, a very simple application. Where this goes a little bit further in the first instance is that the decision logic is actually a lot more involved. So whilst the application at the front end still looks as simple as the first one, what it's doing in this instance is actually invoking a decision that's got a lot more steps to it, because what it's trying to do is to say, well, if you've got some products already, I need to make sure this isn't a duplicate. If it is a duplicate, I need to make sure that I make it unique again. And I also need to take the details that you've given me and consolidate those into a standard format for the SKU. So what you can actually see if I do another one of these, so this time I'm going to say it's a neon pink, but it's a collar. It's also going to be, well, this time I'm going to do it in cotton, generate an SKU for that. That's come up with, so you can see that what it's done is it's taken the first three letters of that, made it uppercase, first three letters of that, made it uppercase. So the decision logic in here is doing a bit more. So for example, I've got these product details. And what I'm putting into the product details is what's the color or pattern, item type, and fabric type. So I've kept that pretty close to what I've called it here. And one of the things that I'm going to do with that is actually, in creating the SKU, I'm going to do things like turn the color or pattern into an uppercase, first three letters, and change that. Do the same with the item type, do the same with the fabric type. So there's a bit more involved in this. I'm creating an index to make if I've got duplicates. The other thing that I'm doing is I'm actually getting another set of input data, which is the existing SKU list. So what I'm actually doing in this particular instance, and I'll go to the flow, is in Microsoft Flow, I've got the same starting point, which is Power Apps, but as part of getting the input data from Power Apps, I'm also getting input data from SharePoint. So this is a SharePoint connector that you can get in Microsoft Flow, and what I've done is a command called get items. So what that's actually done is that's gone to the list SKU generator on the Sydney and Betty Blue Powder Consultancy SharePoint site, and it's going to get me all of the items out of that list. And what's basically happening is the decision here is then taking that SKU list and trying to work out whether it's a duplicate or not. The beauty of that is that it's also using SharePoint as the database that sits underneath it. So in my first example, all I was doing was creating fees, but I wasn't actually storing them anywhere. Once I reset the data, it was gone. With this, what I'm actually doing is I'm using SharePoint to actually store the data as well. So SharePoint's used quite a lot in organizations. More often than not, it's used just as an online document storage, but I tend to use these things as much more of almost a pseudo database. So what I'm going to show you now is where that information is actually being stored. So if I go to Sku Generator, what I've got here is a whole list of SKUs, and you can see how many we've got. If I go right down to the bottom, actually let me sort it by modified. Okay, so neon pink, neon yellow, neon pink are the three that I've just entered as we've been watching it now, and I've stored the SKU into SharePoint. What that means is that when I've clicked on Generate SKU, it's pulled in all of these. So when I created the neon yellow, it knew I already had a Neo HASKU, because at the point where I clicked on Generate SKU, it's gone and got the list from SharePoint, and it's gone, oh, hang on, this already exists, so we've got a duplicate, so add a 1 to it. So that takes the concept a bit further and actually shows how you've got a database there of sorts that you can actually store some of that information in. I could have stored it in Excel. There's that many connectors in Power Apps that you're really spoiled for choice. But the reason I use SharePoint for stuff like this is I like the fact that you can version control them, and the data, I feel, is much more manageable. So that's that example. And that's all I was intending to go through today. Jonathan, I don't know if there's any questions that have popped up while I've been talking through that.
Yes, well, there is one question that's, I guess, popped up in a few minutes ago was the fact that, and it was during the previous example, I know you touched it a little bit here, was the fact that, well, the question was, is decision modeling, or can it be used to streamline processes across multiple systems? So here we saw that you had a mobile app, and you were also working in SharePoint. So I don't know if there's anything you wanted to elaborate on the cross-system, for say, capabilities.
So can you just repeat the original question?
So the original question was, how can decision modeling be used to streamline processes across multiple systems? So during your first example, it was only using the application you built, and the question was around, can it be used to using multiple systems?
Yes, definitely. I think I'd probably need to know a little bit more of the background where the questions come from. So I'll try and answer it how I've interpreted it. But basically, if I go back to my second example and I go to the actual Sku generator, so these two bits obviously are the input data. Now that input data has essentially come from two different systems. So that's come from Power Apps and that has come from SharePoint. So one of the things that you can do with decision modeling is pull input data from different systems. You obviously need something to do that orchestration, and I'm using Microsoft Flow to do that orchestration. So what I'm doing using the process model for is to say, right, in order to present the right data to the decision model, I need to get the data required from the various source systems. So I'm going to go to SharePoint and get some. I'm going to go to Power Apps and get some. So that's a way in which decision modeling will allow you to model outcomes that you need to drive from different systems. I don't necessarily know if that's exactly the question that was being asked, or whether they're talking about processes that exist in different systems where those processes are slightly similar, but for legacy reasons they're done off two different systems. So I don't know, you'd have to, the attendee would just have to say whether or not I'm touching on the right kind of stuff.
Perfect. We'll try to follow up with the attendee that asked the question, and we have some other questions here, but there are a little bit. They need to give us a little bit more detail, just like the one we just got previously. So Herschel, Steve, Michael, we will all get back to you personally, because we will need to have a little bit more details around your question. So without putting you on the spot further, Nick, I will thank you very much. And everybody, as I was saying, the recording will be available a little bit later today. We'll send you an email, and I invite you as well to respond to that email if you have any further questions. Thank you very much, Nick, for your time once again.
You're welcome. Hopefully that was helpful to you guys. I know there's quite a lot of stuff that's been covered, and I've classed it all as very simple. There's obviously a learning curve with everything. Personally, I believe that being able to do all of this myself in using the Office components, what I like about that is that it means that within your organization you can build apps that are probably pretty secure, because your organization will typically have already put their security wrappers around the Office products, so you are actually saving a lot of development time in a lot of instances, and that's why I'd kind of encourage you to explore the capabilities that some of your existing stuff gets. And then, you know, the beauty of the Trisotech modeler, and particularly the cloud publication stuff, is that it allows you, it's done so much of the work for you by making that API JSON file available, that you can just plug into it, because it's easy to change as well. I didn't go into that detail now, but changing some of the conditions, the input expressions, the actual logic, it is dead easy to do. So yeah, so hopefully that's inspired a few people to have a bit of a think, have a bit of a play.
Yes, absolutely. Great example. Thank you once again, and to everybody, until next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.